Unmuted.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Master the Game of Who, Leveraging Network Intelligence and User Activity to Combat Insider Threats, sponsored by FlowTrack. Today's featured speakers are security experts Vince Berk, Mike Tierney, along with Dr. Eric Cole. If you have any questions for Vince, Mike, or Eric during the presentation, please feel free to enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We'll be answering them during the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Dr. Eric Cole.
Muted.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are so excited to be talking about the topic of insider threat. And this is meant to be as interactive as possible. I'm going to give a quick 10-minute overview of insider threat just to get you thinking about the problem, getting you starting to understand why this is such a big issue. Then we're going to have an open discussion, and we would really love to answer any of the questions you have. So unlike some webcasts where you wait to the very end to ask questions, we don't like doing that. If you have a question, we want to answer it immediately. We don't want you to have to wait till the end. So feel free in that question tab to type questions at any time. We'll be monitoring that live, and we'll make sure that we address any questions that you might have. What I always like to start off with when we talk about insider threat is really understanding the problem set. If you go out and talk to random people on the street and ask them, what is the biggest threat out there today? Most people, without missing a beat, would say, oh, it's the external threat. Because you hear about foreign adversaries, competitors, organized crime, people targeting and going after individuals and organizations. So many people have this picture that really the biggest problem out there are all these external threats that are targeting and going after us, our family, our businesses, and our country. But we need to step back for a second, and we need to differentiate between the source of the threat and the cause of damage. Yes, the source of many threats are external. However, the cause of damage in almost all cases is the insider, somebody within the organization that is doing something either tricked, manipulated, or deliberately to cause harm to your organization. So if we really want to solve this problem of cybersecurity, we really have to focus in and address the area of insider threat. Insider threat is what's causing the damage. The source is external, but the cause of damage is internal, and this is why many organizations are struggling with the problem. Just do this quick exercise. How much money in your security budget are you spending on external threats? How much of your security budget are you spending on insider threats? With most of our clients, around 80% of their budget is externally focused, because that's the source, right? That's what we hear about. But then do this exercise. Look at all the incidents you've had. What was the percent of damage that was caused by external, and what was the percent of damage that was caused by internal? And I'll tell you, in most cases, only 30% of the damage is caused external, and 70% is internal. So I'm not saying that they're both not important, but my question to you is this: why are you spending 80% of your budget on 30% of the problem? Or more importantly, why are you spending 20% of your budget on 70% of the problem? That's the issue today. Organizations are misaligned, and they're trying to still set up all this external perimeter focus, and they're missing the bigger problem, which is the insider threat. Now, when we talk about insider threat, there's often a big misunderstanding. Even when I talk to my colleagues, everyone thinks insider threats are only deliberate, malicious insiders, like Aldrich Ames, Robert Hansen, Edward Snowden most recently. That's what they think of the insider threat. That's only a small piece of the puzzle. When we talk about insider threat, there's actually two pieces. There is the malicious, deliberate insider, and that's always going to be there. That's a hard problem. But the bigger problem is the accidental insider, somebody who's tricked or manipulated into doing something they normally wouldn't do if they knew the true intent of their actions. That's the issue today. As organizations have made it harder for adversaries to break into externally facing servers, now they're focusing on insiders, tricking and manipulating them to do something, open an attachment, click on a link that ultimately will allow that adversary to cause harm to your organization. So in many cases, when we're talking about insider threat today, don't just think deliberate, malicious insider. Think the accidental insider, because in many organizations, that's the much bigger problem. So if we sort of look at the state, insider threat is sort of on many people's radar, but it's often a small little blip. That they often really don't understand that it is the cause of damage, and they really don't understand the accidental insider and how they could be tricked or manipulated. The other big thing is most organizations don't really deploy or have any solutions for the insider threat. They're buying all these whiz-bang, greatest technologies, which is good for filtering inbound and outbound and looking for foreign adversaries and doing traceback and all this other stuff, but really it's within your organization. The probability that you have a compromised insider within your organization today is almost guaranteed. It's almost a guarantee that's there. One of the things we often talk about is the component of hunting. Go and look for the insiders. They're there. If you're not seeing them, it's not because they don't exist, but it's because you're not looking in the right places. And the reason why we want to focus on the insider is because that's what's causing the most financial damage to your organization. And trust me, if you look at the recent trends and you look at how adversaries work and operate, it's only going to be increasing. It's only going to get worse and worse. So this is one of those problems. The more you ignore it, the more exposure you have. So just once again, to get you thinking about the problem, just to set the stage for a wonderful panel discussion that we're going to start in just a few minutes, just a few questions for you to think about. What information would somebody be targeting? If you woke up today and you decided to go rogue, you decided to become an insider threat, and you decided to hurt your organization, what information would you be targeting? What information would an adversary most likely want? Then do what we call threat modeling, which is one of the best ways to get your arms around this insider threat problem. How would you do it? How would you go about stealing or targeting that information? Then from there, look at what your exposures are, and then start going in and start fixing and addressing those issues. So that's how you want to think about it. What would be the ways that somebody would target, manipulate, and go after insiders, and how would you protect against it? Also, what is your current exposure on your internal network? What I'm referring to is if one of your computers get compromised, how much damage, how much access could that one system have? Most organizations' internal networks are still fairly flat and open, which means if they can compromise any single insider, they can get access to large amounts of information. And then just some of the areas to think about. Sort of go in and start performing an assessment. Give yourself a report card. You'll notice my style is I love a thinking audience. I don't want you just to sit there and say, Eric said insider threat is important. I want you to go back and prove it. I want you to go in and prove us right or prove us wrong. But go in and do those exercises. Do the first exercise on what % of your budget are you spending on insider threat. Answer the questions on the previous slide, and then assess how well are your policies focused on insider threat. If you're doing a good job, give yourself an A. If you're doing a bad job, give yourself an F. How much training and awareness have you really done focused on insider threat? I'm not talking about, I know October is Security Awareness Month, and I'm not talking about just going in and doing your generic awareness, don't take candy from strangers type things. I'm talking about focused on specific problems and deficiencies in your policies that if your users perform better would reduce your exposure to insider threat. Focused awareness and focused training. Also, how much technology do you have focused in on the insider threat? So you can't fix a problem unless you know where the problem came from. And then just some concluding thoughts before we jump into the panel is really step back and ask yourself, what is your exposure to insider threat? Both deliberate and accidental. How easy would it be for somebody within your organization to be targeted? And what you're looking at there is go out and look on the internet, look on social media. How visible are your employees? How much information are they giving away? Because we find very often when we do insider threat assessments that you have these individuals and organizations that are giving away information on projects. You can go into social media and easily be able to find out who's somebody's bosses, the projects, other info. So you could very easily craft an email that looks very legitimate, make it look like it came from their boss, and almost guarantee that they're going to open the attachment or click on the link. Also go in and technically look at your inbound and outbound flows. Look for anomalies. Look for any unusual traffic patterns, and then ask yourself, what do you gain and what do you lose by doing certain actions? For example, executable attachments are one of the main methods of delivery. What would be the real impact to your organization if you block or filter them? And what is the impact today by allowing them unfettered into your organization? Those are the types of questions you have to ask and start looking at. So now that we sort of have a foundation of what we're talking about with insider threat, let me go ahead and introduce our two awesome panelists. I've worked with both Vince and Mike before in different webcasts and different papers. They're awesome to work with, so I was thrilled when I was asked to be on this panel. So we have Vince from FlowTrack and Mike from SpectraSoft. Both have spent a lot of time working, dealing with insider threat. They have first-hand knowledge on this problem space. So welcome, Vince and Mike. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here,
Eric. So remember, as we jump in to our topics, please type questions at any time. Please type questions anytime that you have, and we will fit them into the presentation. So what I'd like to do is sort of kick things off with topic one, is let's just look at what problem we're dealing with. So let's throw out a question. What's the most insidious insider threat scenario you've seen in real life, and how was it detected? So we'll start with Vince. Vince, can you give us an idea of sort of how bad this problem is and an example of an insider threat scenario, just what the overall damage was, and then we'll jump over to Mike.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. You know, typically when we get
when we get called into sort of these insider threat problems, the customer has already been trying to understand what has happened, and they simply can't tie it all back together anymore, and that's when we're asked to help. The severity of the problem, as you indicated, is sometimes measured monetarily. I would argue that damage to brand and damage to the image of the organization is another one of those phenomenal factors. Now, and what I specifically talk about is an insider threat that is either originates from the outside world, is very persistent, and is very knowledgeable of the kinds of damage that he or she may want to do, as well as on the other end, the insider that is truly trusted individual inside your organization that effectively knows all your assets. And so when we look at these situations, when we get called in, the insider is usually, the damage has already occurred, if you will. And what we're looking at is often either an insider who came from the outside, is working diligently to obtain credentials to assets on the network, which may be files, which may be documents, maybe trying to improve their position, try to get their hands on additional credentials, and will therefore be performing reconnaissance, scanning, what have you. Or even worse, we're talking about somebody who you trust inside your organization and knows where the assets are, knows who has access to those assets, which is really important. That gives them a leg up on the competition from the malicious outsider, if you will. And they have either started exfiltrating, or worse, which is some of the scenarios I have seen that are exceptionally gnarly, is where the insider isn't simply looking to exfiltrate information, but is deliberately changing information in a minute way, causing sabotage to your organization. And just think about what would happen if numbers and spreadsheets were changed, if relationships, links, or even, in our case, we're a software company, somebody made changes to our source code instead of simply stealing it. So we've seen the gamut there, and generally my observation is the organization suffering this insider threat simply does not have sufficient visibility into their organization's network to understand what is actually happening.
Excellent. Mike, do you have a scenario or some information to add to kick things off?
Yeah, I do, and I have to say, when I was driving to work this morning, I had XM radio on, and I had the 80s channel on, whatever that one is. So today, this is the second time I've heard the word gnarly used, and I did not anticipate that when I woke up, so that was excellent. So, in terms of one of the things that we see most often, and that I've seen personally most often, relates to what I would call a true malicious insider, and that's the departing insider, right? The person that has made a decision to leave the company, or believes they're going to be asked to leave the company, and so much damage happens when that's going on. So much IP and confidential information tends to walk out with those folks, and that's a thing that I think that I know I'm shocked over and over and over again when it happens, because it is so common and so widely known, and really not all that difficult to deal with. But I've seen in my personal life everything from sales reps printing screen grabs of CRM systems, thinking that they're avoiding any means of detection by doing that, all the way up to officers and companies, loading up on company IP on their way out the door. And one of the things, to sort of echo what Vince said, where companies are suffering from a lack of visibility or a lack of good data on exactly what happened, if you're in one of those situations where the insider is no longer there, they've left the company, and now you come to the realization that you think they took something with them, without that really clear, complete, easy to understand data, it's very difficult to remediate that situation, because oftentimes you're going to be going out and seeking legal recourse, and you're now dealing with a very non-technical audience. If you can bring that audience, very clear and again, complete information, they're going to give you a favorable response. But if you can't, the burden is going to be on you to prove that you've been harmed. It's much harder to succeed. And then the other piece, just off of that and building off of what you talked about earlier, is the folks that are coming in and compromising credentials. And it seems of late that you can't get more than a couple of days sometimes without seeing another example of somebody coming in with compromised credentials and doing a lot of damage. So that that concept of the external actor, whether they're manipulating the insider or they've in some respects become the insider, and now you're not sure if Tom is really Tom anymore and what they're doing. Those are the two that I've seen most in my personal life and that seem to be coming up most often in the news today. And both of them speak to the need for that, the word that Vince likes to use is telemetry, but having that complete view, from various different angles of what's going on within your environment so that you can deal with it effectively.
Excellent. I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, no, go ahead, Vince.
Because Mike has already pointed out two words that I like to use, both of which is telemetry and gnarly. But the thing I want to echo on that though is that in my earlier career I spent a lot of time on network forensics on the network, which typically is incident investigation. And Eric, you're absolutely right. Most of those incidents have to do with people who knew what they were getting their hands on. And and when I started that many years ago, I thought, eventually we will learn. It's like years and years have gone by, and we've all gone to SANS classes. We've all learned, geez, make sure you don't have chewy centers, make sure you have defense in depth. And every single time, even today, when you're in an organization trying to understand what it is that has happened or that is happening to you, people have no idea of what is normal and what is abnormal. There's no information or telemetry, as Mike just said, being collected on the network. Often, if anything, what we find is people collecting information in their logs, meaning they have maybe an idea of who logged into what system, but there is no true further evidence of what then subsequently happened. A lot of it is driven by collecting alerting information. Simply, alerts that happen, they're the only thing that's stored, but trying to find out what truly happened just from identifiable events is often extremely difficult.
And let's play off that, because both of you brought up the idea of we know, and by the way, it's no longer insider threat, it's now the gnarly insider. So we're going to make that official name change here. So, but both of you have brought up the point that dealing with the gnarly insider, that we know it exists, but how do we find it? How do we get visibility? How do we get real data to drive change within the organization? Do either of you have some insight on how we get better visibility to really find or prove to decision makers that this is actually a real problem that's out there?
I think Mike and I are going to give the same answer to that one. So why don't you go ahead, Mike?
I'll try, Vince. But we'll see how this goes. So I think it's a difficult challenge for somebody tasked with security to step forward and go to a decision maker and say, hey, I don't have the visibility I need, right? Because then that immediately is going to at times cause that decision maker to go, whoa, well, what have you been doing? So, they're inherent in that, there's a little bit of a challenge, but in terms of convincing a decision maker that additional investment is needed, whether it's in people, process, or technology, I really don't think needs to be overly hard. It doesn't take long to assemble, a litany of examples of insider attacks that have caused real damage, whether they be through that malicious insider, the accidental insider, or the compromised insider. You start rattling off Target and OPM and Anthem, some of the most widely publicized recently all kind of fall into those categories. I think those are all compromised credentials off the top of my head. So I think just having that can help. The biggest piece that I've seen from folks that are working through that is breaking through that "it can't happen here" mindset, or the not in my shop mindset, that it can't happen. And it gets back to that that original dilemma in security. If we haven't detected an attack, then does it mean we don't have an attack, or does it mean we just didn't see it?
That's the old adagio of no evidence of compromise isn't the same as evidence of no compromise, right? It doesn't mean you've not been compromised if you didn't see it.
Exactly. So I think, Eric, to tie back, and then I'll yield the rest of my time to Vince here, to tie back to what you said earlier, those exercises to go through, of looking at the percentage of damage caused by insiders versus outsiders is an invaluable exercise to help with that discussion with the decision maker. Because then, traditionally, if I step out of this role and step into my role as an operator in the company, if you can bring me data, that shows, then I'm gonna act on it pretty quickly. So that type of exercise, I think, would be invaluable. But Vince, did you have anything else you want to say?
Oh, I would echo you on this, right? So the types of people that we help have traditionally been in that category of sort of the cyber hunter, the individual that has been tasked by the company to come to an understanding what it is that is happening on their network and on their systems, and possibly with that, hunt down, track, and actively disable threats that are happening. And the question of cost justification, making that investment, because it's not just an investment in product, it's an investment in smart people, and it's also an investment in business process, because you don't just want to have a bunch of smart individuals who are actively trying to defend your network from insider threats. You also want those folks to have some kind of mandate, some way of being allowed to stop or change processes. Look, we shouldn't be emailing these credit card numbers around anymore. We saw that was happening on the network. That is going to go wrong at some point if it already hasn't, right? They need to have an ear. So typically, what we have found is that the sell to the superiors, and this echoes what you said, Mike, isn't actually hard, because once you start collecting telemetry and actually looking at it, I'm not talking about just collecting and dumping it in a database. I'm talking about looking at it, understanding what's normal and what's abnormal. That individual will have an immediate explanation and evidence to show that what we can now see and we never saw before is going to be vital in keeping the company safe or minimizing damage when the eventual compromise does happen. But that's what I'd add to that.
Excellent. So the point we brought up, which is spot on, is another great way of gaining visibility is by looking at baselines, or what we call normal activity, and looking for deviations against that. And I agree completely. That's one of the best strategies I use for both proving that there's a problem and looking for insiders within the network. What I'd like to do is let's give the audience some actionable components on that front. So it's one thing for us to say, build that baseline, but what are some of the key metrics that you put in the baseline? I know some of the ones that I typically use are access attempts of data, failed access attempts of data, uploads and downloads from the internet, because typically when somebody becomes an insider threat, there's usually deviation patterns in terms of what's being accessed, how it's being accessed, and how that information is being transferred. So I've had a lot of luck using those as some metrics. Vince and Mike, do you have some other metrics we can give the audience of what they should look at when they're building a baseline, and what should that baseline include?
Mike, you go first.
Oh, sure. So, from my perspective, we're too polite on this, but we'll get over it. From our perspective, we look at user behavior. So I'll try to speak from that perspective, because Vince will have a slightly different one coming from the network side. So there are a lot of things that you can look at. You talked about access attempts and failed access attempts, and just to broaden that out a little bit, what we strive to provide and what the general class of solutions that falls into kind of user behavior analytics strives to provide is just an understanding of normal. So how does a person, an insider, normally interact with the resources and accesses they've been given? And then when we see a deviation from that, what does that potentially mean? So it can be access attempts, it can be the amount of data someone's pulling down, and you can cross to a level that a human couldn't possibly be interacting with all this data. So that becomes a suspicious anomaly. Why are they pulling all this in? And then you can tie that out beyond that to, well, I can see that they're also increased their usage, say, in or their usage pattern or behavioral pattern as it relates to use of cloud storage. So now I have them pulling down a lot of information, and I also have them uploading a lot of information out of my control. So I would look at things like things with data exfiltration potential. So increasing printer usage for non-technical, kind of low and slow and true insider type things. Increased movement of documents to portable storage devices off the network, whether it be through email or out to some of these bring your own cloud solutions or shadow IT that are kind of popped up everywhere. So you can kind of focus on what are you trying to make sure is not happening. We're trying to make sure our data doesn't get out. So let's focus on behaviors that are related to that. So I think, along that general spectrum, related to what you're saying, Eric, but just try to think of the thing you're trying to prevent and then say, all right, what would people be doing to cause that harm or damage? And let's zero in on the things related to that. Vince, what were you going to say?
In these scenarios, I think that what you're implicitly pointing out, and what I'm going to try to make explicit, is that the sorts of things that we look for and we baseline by themselves may not indicate a malicious behavior, right? So another step is needed. So for instance, things that we typically recommend people look for on their network is communications with known bad systems, tracking volumes of data moving in and moving out, either from key assets or to external parts of the network. Track what is normal, right? I'm not saying a communication with Dropbox is bad. What I'm saying is what is normal in your network and get an understanding for that. One thing we always find a very powerful source to track is new clients and new servers popping up on your network, right? People who have gotten their hands on certain assets on a system but need to get those out might start a file server. It might start remote administration tools. These are new services running inside your network that previously nobody was connecting to or using, right? That can be very valuable telemetry. Scanning reconnaissance behavior, login attempts to assets that don't seem to make sense. For instance, people try to log into to services that are used internally in the organization. They don't tend to remotely log into desktops. Things like that are all potential red flags, but not necessarily bad by themselves. And so what I'd like to interject there is that we obviously see things a lot from the network side. We see things that happen on the network that may be other than normal, deviation from the baseline, where the baseline is either comparison to self or comparison to self over time or comparison to others in the peer group. Why is this one system acting different than others? Why is the system started acting differently than it did last month? But it's not just that. It's bringing that together with other telemetry one may have, things that we see on the host, and coming to an understanding that the changes in the behavior that we're observing are legitimate or not, right? So just baselines, they're one thing, but I think that coming to an understanding of what the change in behavior actually means is where you catch your insiders.
Yeah, and if I could just to expand on that a little bit, Vince, I agree with everything you said, but that piece right there of understanding if it's legitimate or not is, I think, where you have to insert the human, right? And when you're dealing with these types of decisions, I see our role to help detect, analyze, prioritize, anomalies or changes, but to present that information to a human operator. The cyber hunter type that you were talking about earlier. And maybe in a smaller company, it might just be the IT guy. but he can say, all right, I have to look at this. But I think you need that human element injected right at that point that you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think, Mike, it's an understanding question, right? So it's sort of a lot of folks will invest in the telemetry, but we have to come to understand that what we're dealing with is not an automated threat. This is not a worm going around. We're talking about an individual who is deliberately trying to either perform espionage, which is a data exfiltration, or sabotage, which could potentially be worse, and they are smart individuals, or at least they're cognizant of the fact that they're probably being watched. You cannot simply rely on collect a bunch of data and now we're all set. Like, I think it's important that there is somebody who can make heads and tails of the information that you collect. The more that can be done in an automated fashion, the better, but assign meaning to the anomalies in the data you collect. I think you're right, Mike. That is where we simply cannot cut the human out of the loop.
Yeah, it's if you take it out of our technology-driven world and you look at how as a country we've dealt with intelligence and how that's changed over time. We went from being almost exclusively reliant on human intelligence to then switching, arguably, some would make the case to too much reliance on signals intelligence when you really need that balance in the middle of combining both things. So, yeah.
Excellent. And as we wrap up this first topic, Ben, if you can advance the slide to the next topic, it doesn't look like the platform is responding to me, so if we could just advance that slide to topic 2. One thing just to wrap up everything that I think is important is automation is really key here. Now you can't take the human out of the loop, but computers are very good at the repetitive tasks of going through large amounts of information and finding those anomalies, and then humans are really good at the analytical component of differentiating whether this was just a change in behavior or whether this was really malicious in content. So I think it's a combination of both automated systems that are looking for this, and you can use your log correlation and SIM and other tools for doing that, and then humans performing the analytic component of that. Okay, so it looks like Ben wasn't able to advance the slide either, so we're going off the grid then. So let's jump to topic 2, which is you've spotted a threat, now what? So now the question is, how do you start going in and dealing with this? So if you have someone in your network that's causing harm, how do you start to mitigate or reduce it? So I guess the question is, if you believe there's an insider threat, or if you've actually found it, how do you actually go in and start mitigating and fixing the environment? Because the concern is if somebody is already in your organization and you try cleaning them up, they're always one step ahead of you. So what are some of the tips or tricks in dealing with cleaning up and minimizing the exposure to that insider threat?
Eric, I want to jump in before letting Mike go on this one, because I think that you're hitting on a key point, and I want to make sure it doesn't go lost. When an insider or when an adversary has credible credentials on your network and has been trying to penetrate and infiltrate, one of the important facts is that what you have just detected may not be the entire story, right? They might have been there for a while. They may have their hands on more credentials than you realize. They may have, backup plans, backdoors, what have you, that you're not entirely aware of. I think that one really important, and this is strategic, this is not, just turn off the account, because I'm sure Mike is going to talk about that, but I think that one important thing is that try to come to as best an understanding of what assets this individual has their hands on as you possibly can, right? Actually standing back and watching as opposed to immediately acting may be the best thing to do in your particular situation. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you need to have a complete understanding. And there's times that I'll compare, conceptually what we're doing with the eye in the sky in a casino, right? And there's so many parallels. But when when the folks in casino security suspect that they have an issue down on the floor, they don't just, the minute they say, okay, that dealer right there, they don't just run down and pull him off the floor. They try to ascertain, is he working with somebody else? What else is going on? They're already thinking about not only remediating the immediate problem they've seen, but any related problems, and then they're starting to play that forward into how are we going to prevent this again. So I think it's essential to be able to do that. It's also essential just from a fact gathering or data gathering or evidence gathering to make sure you have a complete understanding so that as you switch into remediation mode, you're able to deal with the full scope of the problem rather than just the piece that you saw at that moment when it became apparent. And then to extend that out one further, there's a little bit of a difference. The question up on there, does it matter if it's a malicious insider or an accidental insider? Where I see a difference is if it's a true insider, and let's say a true and malicious insider versus, maybe somebody being manipulated or a compromised credential situation. If you're dealing with an actual insider within the organization, employee of the company, you're going to have an extended team that engages in how you deal with that. Because they're a person, and they're, the company's going to have policies, and legal rights will start to come into play. And if you're collectively bargained, you have a whole other set of issues. But you're going to start to think about, folks in HR and legal, internal legal departments, and business line managers, and they're going to have to be brought into the loop at some level to be able to deal with this problem. And again, you're going to be dealing with the need to explain quickly and clearly to folks that don't live in your world, this is the problem and this is how I know it's a problem. Because they're going to be looking for, at minimum, if I use a legalistic term, a preponderance of evidence to provide you with the air cover you need to then go in and shut the threat down at the appropriate time. So I think for all those reasons, doing as much data gathering as you can without, really allowing the damage to run out of control is important.
I think there's a game to it too, Mike. And the first thing you really want to come to some kind of terms on is whether or not you're dealing with the individual whose account or credentials are being used. If you're actually dealing with that particular individual, or if the credentials of that individual have been compromised. And I'll bring you a story on what I have seen a cyber hunt team do that we that's a customer of ours, and we actually call them network cowboys here at FlowCheck. And they had a really interesting approach to this. So they had pretty widely deployed telemetry because they felt this was an issue that was important to them. And upon any suspicion of particular insider behavior, what they would actually do is they would start to play, and they would move assets around. They would see what assets were being accessed. Then they would change that. They would restrict a little bit of access here, and then watch and see what it is that the individual does. Right? If there's now, are they going to start coming in late in the day? Are they going to start printing instead of copying? And with that game of slightly but not disruptively, if you will, change what this insider is seeming to be trying to achieve, you not only learn what they're trying to do, you can also gain understanding of how smart are they? Are other accounts all of a sudden being used? Do they have deeper access than I realized? But it is very hard, and it required a smart human to do, because changing access and assets ever so slightly that you are forcing a change in an insider's behavior that wouldn't necessarily affect the operation of a trusted party just doing their job. That requires insight and understanding. It was a beautiful game. I've watched it.
So let's put that on pause for 1 second. Let's get the audience involved. So let's do a poll question on, have you established a baseline for normal network and user behavior so you can recognize anomalies? We're sort of interested to see where the audience is at. So let's go ahead and do a poll question on how well are people baselining that environment that's there today. Now, jumping back to the discussion, I think a key point comes up. So when we're talking about traditional attacks, we're always about blocking and stopping. When you're looking at viruses and worms and those types of attack vectors, you want to prevent and stop them. But it sounds like with Insider, threats, you're not going to be able to stop them. It's really more about controlling and minimizing damage. Is that sort of the right approach of create an environment that minimizes the damage as opposed to trying to really stop them? Because anything you do to stop them, they'll just divert or get around.
Yeah, so I think, Eric, if I go first here, a very wise man once said to me that when it comes to insider threats, prevention isn't ideal, right? Detection is a must. And I think that where we're at from a technological standpoint and the capability limitations that still exist, it's very difficult to say we're gonna shut down the possibility of an insider attack and take that same prevention first mind frame. And I've seen actually organizations kind of induce self-paralysis a little bit because they can't figure out how to prevent it, and they end up doing nothing. So from my perspective, you need to be able to say, all right, how do I prevent someone that I've given access from using that access in a way I don't want them to? It's a very tricky question. So it does lend itself to how do I detect if it looks like that access is being used for a reason I don't want it to, and then how do I mitigate that? So I would largely agree with that statement.
It's a continuum there, Mike, because like in the end, the perfectly secure organization is the one that doesn't have any information or doesn't have any individual have access to information, which is unrealistic because then the organization wouldn't be able to do their jobs, right? So inherently there is a spectrum we need to fall on, and many techniques exist: collect, detect, compartmentalize, monitor, and be smart about it. But not just that. In the end, I think we've got to come to the understanding that it's a human game, in a technological battlefield. This isn't a problem of technology. It's simply a problem that is more exacerbated with technology, right? Because in the old days, maybe I had secret documents in my filing cabinet, and that filing cabinet was standing in my office. So if anybody wanted access to it, well, they kind of have to walk in, and then they would only be able to get what's in my filing cabinet. Nowadays, our filing cabinets are huge file servers that contain thousands of folders where everybody is putting all their stuff together because it's so convenient to back up and do disaster recovery if everything is in one spot. But it does mean that the guy that makes the backup can now see everything, right? So we haven't. The problem isn't new. The problem has just moved to a different battle space.
Excellent. That sort of ties us into our third and final topic. So let's go ahead and bring up that slide in terms of sort of what's the current state of the market, where do organizations go from here. So can either one of you recommend some specific usage policies or things that organizations can do to better enforce policies to help protect against insider threat?
You want to go ahead, Vince?
Yeah, sure thing. I just figured, Mike, I don't want to overrule you again here. I think that I mean, I know you're from New Jersey. I got to be careful. The first, the most important step, Eric, I think that individuals and organizations need to take is to create the awareness for the problem. The problem is much more severe than what most people like to think. And it's easy to go in and get the verbal approval. Yeah, absolutely, big problem. You go do something about it. But the second thing there is a mandate, right? We have seen, what I'm saying, the individual steps that need to be taken in order to be better able to defend yourself, based on the premise that a perfectly secure organization cannot be created. You just need to be as secure as you possibly can get for the money that you have or for the resources that you're allowed to dedicate. I think it is important that you get the buy-in, you get the understanding that this is a problem that needs to be dealt with, that this problem is not something that can simply be shoveled on the folks that provide infrastructure operations, or even the folks that provide standard security services such as DDoS defense or running the firewalls. but instead you're hoping to create an individual or multiple individuals, or at least a mandate for people where they are able to collect the telemetry they need and act on that if they see something inappropriate, and that you're going to trust them to do so. So, it may actually even be that this is an individual you already have in your organization that simply needs to be allowed to perform this task. It may already be that a lot of telemetry is in place. Some organizations do, and it simply needs to be purposed for this particular task. But I think that the key in here is that we all must come to understand that this is not an afterthought. This is a key security function that fits with an individual that is given substantial leeway to search and seek out these threats as they happen.
Yeah, the term, Vince, that I use for that is air cover, right? And I picked that up from one of our clients, and they were rare in the fact that they had gone through the work up front within the security group of getting that mandate from the company's management of, if we encounter, a true insider scenario, are we empowered to, and then, run through a bunch of actions, that included everything from shutting that person down completely to watching and some of the other things we talked about. And they have a very clear, way of operating when they encounter these things, so they don't get into that uncertain posture of, now how are we going to deal with this? So I think preparation, first acknowledge that it's a problem, right? I think at the outset, Eric said that, you have a compromised insider, right? You have compromised credentials. You have to kind of have that mindset. You have to assume that you've already been compromised. You have to assume that the threat is present. So how can you prepare to deal with that as it becomes evident to you where that threat is? It's about collecting the data and having it. It's about having that mandate to be able to go in and act. And then it's about having a plan, within your incident response plan that has the provisions necessary to deal with an insider, because it is a little bit different, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I think that naturally, if you decide to make this a priority in your organization, which Eric already pointed out, if it isn't, you're making a mistake, then the individual who sits down on Monday morning and is tasked with finding the insiders will automatically bring to you the questions of, I don't have visibility here or there. I don't have the telemetry I need. I need to be able to do, for this group of individuals, see that much data. Why are we not collecting that? And the individual will drive the telemetry collection, the storage of that, and probably the security of that, because by itself, telemetry is also valuable as it comes to threats, right? And simply by the curiosity of the individual who's performing this job, you will see that your data acquisition is going to grow, your baselining and anomaly detection is going to grow, and it is going to get used, and problems will be brought to you that you didn't think were an issue in your organization at all.
We've hit the dreaded dead air. So I'm just going to build off of that a little bit. But I think one of the things, if you're trying to figure out within your organization how to affect getting that mandate, one of the simple ways is to take some of these very publicly known things that have happened, and there's been so many of them recently, and do an honest assessment of, could I have detected that? Could I have gotten in? And if you don't think you have the visibility or the mandate to go and take care of that issue, then you can highlight that and say, look, this is what happened. This is what happened at Anthem, and this is how they came in and they used sysadmin credentials, and they ran a database query, and then they uploaded a bunch of data to cloud storage, and I don't have the visibility I need to make sure that doesn't happen to us. And that those types of real world examples tied in, I've found, can really help advance a discussion.
Yeah, excellent.
Well,
we just got a great question from the audience. Are people in industries using something like Oracle Audit Vault, which can be configured with rules for access that can flag activity, report anomalies, and raise a red flag when needed? If not, what kind of tools are they using to perform this analysis?
So I'll go first on. You're going to go? All right, go ahead, Vince.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Oh my, please, by all means. Well, what I was going to say is that yes, I have seen that used, but one of the key issues that I think you're going to point out too, there, Mike, is that we're not talking one tool, we're not talking one data source. We're talking about collecting many different angles of information, right? You can't detect the enemy is walking across your borders if all you've got is, binoculars. You need to have a radar, and you need to have a satellite in the sky. You need to have guys sitting on hilltops. You need many different angles of visibility in order to get better and better at this. And so, yes, absolutely track this. Start with setting up smart rules. Is somebody accessing more than 100 medical records a day? Yes, I want to know about that. But it's not just that. Where's my network traffic going? Are they running strange applications that they shouldn't be running on their desktop? Are they performing reconnaissance? Are they sending email at weird times? There may be so many different pieces of information that you'd like to bring together, and the more of those that you can bring together, the better your chances are on being defended here. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, and we probably got dangerously close to a charged political discussion when you started talking about borders. But the one thing I would say is that I think you can employ rule-based solutions, but you need a mix then that can also start to add in more machine learning and data science into that, because rules at times are going to behave like the AV industry as it's had to evolve, and you go from signature files out to heuristics, right, and behavioral analysis. And I think we need to be looking at that as well, because a rule-based system at times can have trouble keeping up. So I think a blend of those things, smart rules like Vince alluded to, and then solutions that employ a little bit different way of understanding what normal is and flagging on anomalies from that can help both detect things that might otherwise get missed and cut down on that signal to noise ratio at the same time.
So we're getting close on time, so let's do a final question. How can you sell your executive team on investing in insider threat? Because we've just covered a lot of territory. I think most of the people on the call are excited about insider threat. The question now is, how do you go back to those executives, get them excited, and sell them to invest in this type of program?
Yeah, so I would say, as a start, it wouldn't be a bad idea to just excerpt the audio of Eric at the beginning of this call, because I think he did a pretty good job of laying the groundwork. And then, I think we touched on a lot of different ways that you can do that. The exercise of going through and saying, okay, what percentage of damage has come from the insider versus my budget, and how that's aligned. As we talked about earlier, I think it's a very valuable exercise. Taking the time to look at some of the things that have happened and some of the concerns, whether it's compromised credentials or a true malicious person, is another way to say, would we have been in a position to detect and deal with that before the damage really got into the expensive areas, and be able to protect the company that way. I think that's a way of doing it. And at times it helps to just take something that's a universal use case and say, hey, I don't have the tools I need to deal with this one thing that is happening within my company. And I'll go back to sort of where I started. Every company, regardless of industry, regardless of size, has employees that are going to leave it. And the models show from folks like at CERT and on all the surveys and studies show that when people leave companies, things you don't want to leave also leave with them. And do you have the tools in place to be able to look at that and say, I'm aware that we have a departing employee scenario. Can I represent to this company that we're okay? Do I have the tools I need to be able to do that in an efficient manner? Because we're always trying to balance security with getting the other things that we need to get done. Sometimes it helps to just take one of those very common use cases and lead in with that. Vince, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some of the poll results that I saw coming by. So 40% of the respondents say that they have no way of collecting either host or network telemetry inside their organization, and that alone, that number alone, is very scary. It means there's nothing being collected, and being able to even come to an understanding of what somebody might be taking with them, they're completely blind to. In fact, if that were the case, I would really, really prefer that nobody in my organization would actually know if I wasn't actually watching them, because somebody who feels watched is going to be thinking twice before they actually go ahead and steal data.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that takes us to the top of the hour. I want to thank both of you for your time. This was excellent. From an audience, if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to email us. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. We hope you enjoyed this webcast, and good luck in protecting and securing against the insider threat. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Eric.
Unmuted.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we're just out of time, as Eric said. So I can say thank you very much to our speakers, Dr. Eric Cole, Vince, and, of course, Mike. This webcast has been recorded and will be posted for archive. You'll be able to view the recording in about 2 hours after this has closed out. I'd like to say thank you very much to FlowTrack for sponsoring this webcast, and everyone, have a nice day. Thank you.
Muted.